After 55 years, I'm now at the stage of life where I'm attempting to build the ship that I always wanted to build, and this ship being a plank on hull construction, mainly the old Ironsides or U.S. Constitution. This was built in 1797 and classified as a 44-gun frigate. Old Ironsides basically is 204 feet long, 44 feet at the beam, and 1,533 tons. At full capacity, it would carry 475 men. That's a lot of people in that area. So the ship itself is very interesting because of its history, and incidentally, it's the only ship, it's the oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy, and I think does sail at least once a year. However, I think only 10% of the ship is original after so many years. I think what I want to do, though, on this one, since I'm still in the construction stage, many people that are going to be watching this video probably have never seen how a ship plank on hull is constructed. I thought what I'd do, since I've had pictures of the construction, I'm going to do a fast flyby of photos and literally start building the ship on a photo process up to the point where it is right now. And of course, I've got quite a few years to go to finish it. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this video presentation. Thanks. Here we have a view of the finished model on its stand in the living room. This was just before we put it in the glass case. This will give us a chance to see some of the detail of the lifeboat in the back, plus some of the coppering that went along the bottom and then also onto the rudder area. This will give us a little better view of one of the 4 lifeboats that were equipped on this ship, plus a little bit more view of our rear deck area. A little better view of some of the rear area of the deck looking forward. Here we have a pretty good idea of what the ship looked like just before it went into the glass case, mounted on its pedestal, sitting in the living room. The pedestal again is attached to that board you see underneath it, which is the baseboard that goes into the glass case. Well, here we are in the glass case, and I gotta tell you, this glass case was really heavy. It was just quite a job. We had some help, made a little fixture to hold it so we could lower it over the ship without breaking anything. There was only 2 inches of clearance per side, but with much care we've got it in, and it sealed in there, and hopefully it can stay for many years preserved without dust. This is a model of the Charles P. Notman. This was a 4-masted schooner, 220 feet long. It was launched in 1894 at Bath, Maine, which at that time built more wood ships than any other region or state. Its primary use was hauling coal on the East Coast. Having a schooner rig, graceful profile, clipper bow, and large cargo capacity, it was easily sailed with a minimum crew. Notman had a short but profitable career. She was inadvertently rammed and sunk by the steamer Colorado on June 11, 1900. This is a model of Red Jacket, classified as an extreme clipper ship. She was launched in 1853 at Rockland, Maine. Then the ship was towed to New York, where it was outfitted with her spars and rigging. The dimensions were 250 feet long and 44 feet wide, with a draft of about 24 feet. Proof of her fine sailing ability is the fact that she is only one of 10 sailing ships ever to exceed a passage of over 400 nautical miles in a 24-hour period. After her main voyage to England, Red Jacket was purchased by the White Star Line, the same company that owned Titanic. For the next 15 years, its main sailing destination was from Liverpool, England, to Melbourne, Australia. This is a long trip. This trip was usually made in 65 to 80 days, depending on weather conditions. In 1880, that's about 29 years after being launched, she was put into a transatlantic lumber ship business from Quebec, Canada to England, and later reduced to a coal barge in the Cape Verde Islands. Now this is an interesting model, but it also is a ship with a very interesting history. The Sequin was built in 1884 by the B.F. Morse Shipyard in Bath, Maine. This was for the Knickerbocker Steam Towage Company. She was re-engineered in 1909 with a 275 horsepower compound triple expansion engine, which gave her a top speed of approximately 12 knots, somewhere in that range. She carried a crew of 7, including a captain, mate, engineer, 2 firemen, a cook, and a deckhand. For the first 25 years of her 85-year career, Sequin towed wooden sailing ships up and down the Kennebec in the summer. Then, during the winter, she towed barges laden with coal, lumber, and ice to ports along the Atlantic coast from Maine to Virginia. For the next 10 years, Sequin worked along the Hudson River for the Corwell Towing Company of New York. After that, she spent the remainder of her career primarily serving ports in Maine until her retirement in 1967. In 1969, Sequin was donated to the Maine Maritime Museum at Bath, Maine. Plans to rebuild her and maintain her as one of the few operable steam tugs on the East Coast were abandoned when it was found that too much of her structure was hopelessly rotted and restoration was simply impossible. And with deep regret, Sequin was scrapped and only her pilot house was served as a concession stand at the museum. The ship we're looking at here is called the Baldwin. Unfortunately, in most cases, I've always taken pictures during construction and saved these pictures, and for some reason I cannot find those or did not take them, so the pictures you're going to be seeing are taken through the glass case that it's mounted in, and hopefully we can still pick up some of the fine detail in here. Very pretty, beautiful design, and for an icebreaker, does not look like an icebreaker. But anyway, here's the history of Baldwin. Shortly after his participation in the discovery of the North Pole, Admiral Donald B. McMillan was marooned on North Greenland for 4 years. This was from 1913 to 1917. And while waiting for a rescue ship strong enough to penetrate the ice, he planned a schooner to carry on the work of the uncharted, ice-jammed waters of the Arctic. The schooner Baldwin was the result of McMillan's careful planning. She was designed by William Hand and built in 1921 in East Booth Bay, Maine. Her overall length is 88 feet, a beam of 21, a draft of 9.5 feet, and a total tonnage of about 66 tons. Now, Baldwin covered some 300,000 miles during 26 voyages of exploration to the far north. And in addition, she was used by the U.S. Navy in World War II as a pilot ship for Allied vessels entering and leaving the waters off the west coast of Greenland. McMillan and Baldwin shared a lifetime of adventure. She has always served as an instrument of education. Dozens of scientists, college students, teachers accomplished many firsts under McMillan in scientific, technology, and educational fields. And over 60 years of service to science and humanity have not rendered Baldwin obsolete. No, today she is a registered National Historic Landmark, and after a major restoration and refit, still sails out of Castine, Maine, under the auspices of the Marine Maine Academy. The model we're looking at now is called Yacht America, which was a schooner. This model is different than the other models in the way it's been constructed. Basically, the difference being that we actually show the true ribbing, and I'll go in a little more detail on that as we go through the different pictures. But a little history on the ship. First of all, it was laid down in 1851 with an overall length of 35 feet and a height of 26 feet. And after being launched in New York in 1851, the Yacht America crossed the Atlantic to challenge the entire fleet of England's Royal Yacht Squadron. Having won, she was awarded a silver trophy that has become known as the American's Cup, the most challenged prize in the world of sailing. Now, from here I'm going to go through some of the pictures and probably explain the construction of the ship because it's a little different and it was very challenging, but turned out pretty good. As I explained in the beginning, this ship was built different. I attempted to show what the real rib structure would be like, and in the back view we now see one side's completed, and on the other side, the right hand side, we see the rib structure showing. Now in this view we see the full side, or what I call the unfinished side, showing the complete rib detail. What was different on this ship was most of us build a ship, we just have a center area with a few bulkheads and we plank over that. This was built differently. In this particular case, the individual ribs were actually made just like a real ship was made, so the ship is constructed from the rib detail and then planked over afterwards. More difficult way of building it, but more realistic. We're looking at the top view of what I call the unfinished side, or where we see the ribs. And incidentally, this is the first time I've attempted to put sails on a boat. I had always avoided it, but turned out pretty good, I thought. Again, looking at more of the side where we're trying to show a little bit more of the inner detail, you can see along the deck now I've left open spots where you can see some of the inner rib detail along the cabin area. This gives us a little better view of the backside, showing the rib detail and also how the planks were laid in and fit to the construction of the ship itself. Now we also see the wood pegs that are also held in place, and they did not use nails, they used wood pegs to hold the planks onto the ship, and that's what you see in this particular case. A little better view of the detail showing some of the inner construction, and also you'll note that the cabin detail was made out of mahogany. Kind of an interesting effect on this boat. This picture looks a little bit like the last one, but it really isn't. We're at the forward section of the boat. As you can see, the cabin is built a little bit differently, and you can see part of the lifeboat here. Very difficult detail was making that glass enclosure. Worked pretty hard on that. It's marginal, but it serves the purpose. Well, here we are at the total bow end of the boat, and I think what I'm trying to show here is how the anchors were laid in and held in stow on the ship itself. In this particular boat, we did not put the anchor chain. The interesting view here showing the lifeboat detail. The plan on this ship really did not have a lifeboat detail to work off. They showed that a lifeboat would have been there, so I cheated a little bit. I made a lifeboat that looked like a lifeboat, but the inside is solid. I'm going to call that a cheater's lifeboat. It looks realistic there though, but there's really just a whittled block of wood there. The back on the kitchen table, and again we're viewing the finished side, which has kind of a nice look too, but I think it's good that you can see both on this ship, and I've displayed it so you can look at both sides. Back to the more open detail bow side, again showing all the rib construction put into that. It was a challenging job as those ribs had to be located before any planking went on, so I had to have a fixture that pre-located them so they'd be in the right position once we start forming the boat. This will be our last picture of this yacht, and here again we're on the unfinished side, and it was kind of interesting. I didn't really get a good view, but in that rear cabin area where the tiller arm was, that was a round piece set in there with a seat going all the way around. It was kind of a difficult part of construction, and I didn't really capture that too well, but that's what you see in that back area. The model we're looking at now is the U.S. frigate Confederacy, launched in 1778. A lot of interesting history on this ship, but little is known. Mainly, it was only 2 years after its launch that it was captured by the British. The British thought they had a pretty nice ship there, but when they started to work on it, they realized that green lumber had been used during the construction of the ship, and there was a lot of rot even after 2 years. So it never really amounted to much for the British. However, the design that was used was copied by the British. Now what we're really looking at here is what we call an Admiralty model. Admiralty models were built to show what the ship would look like to the person buying them. And it was important that this model really became the blueprint or the print that the ship would be built from. So on an Admiralty model, masts and things like that were never put on, because that's basically the same on all the sailing ships. However, there was a lot of detail that they wanted to see in cutaways and different sections of the deck to show what the inner part of the ship would look like. This has been an interesting project, probably the most intensive as far as detail I've ever made. So in the pictures following this introduction, I'm going to try to explain what we're looking at in different details of this ship. What we're really looking at is a highly detailed model representative of what they would have presented to somebody purchasing that type of model at that time. The area we're looking at now is the front area where the bowsprit comes out of the ship, and you're looking down over the tops of two toilets, enclosed toilets, and then there were some open heads farther up, as you can see. And the difficult part about this was putting all that little wood detail in, very time consuming. Although this is a plank on hull model, this section was a cutaway where we show what the rib detail would have actually been like inside the ship. What you see is the ribs that would have been in the ship before the planking was put over it. In this view, I'm trying to capture some of the ornate detail that went into the back area. This would have been the cabin where the captain spent his time. Incidentally, there were also cannon in that area too. We are now looking from the top deck down into the lower deck, which would have been the captain's area, and this has a parquet floor in, as you can see through these cutaway views. It was an interesting project making that parquet floor. Here we're seeing a view, again a cutaway, of the top area where I've showed the ship's wheel on the top deck and then the two areas that held the compasses. There were two compasses on this particular ship, and then again you can see part of the parquet floor on the second deck down below. And note when you look at this how the ribs that went across to form the ceiling were actually tied in with supports to the sidewall area. Every detail was put in just exactly the way it was. Going along the side, we now see a little bit more of the detail, some of the doors that are open above the cannon, and some of the area where the rigging, the rigging from the mast would have come down. That is never shown. They just show the basic chain links that they'd be connected to and the block and tackle that went with it. We're now looking at a more open detail. Again, you see the roof rafters going across with their side supports, and then you see off to the right a staircase going from the top deck down to that second deck. And if you look over to the left, you'll also see another, from the second deck, another set of stairs going down to a deck below that. Then some of the open area shows where some of the crating would have been installed. We are now looking at the second deck, which might have actually also been called the main deck, depending upon how they looked at it, with a floor grating in there. And then in the red units you see were the two pumps that they used. They're called bilge pumps with handles on them to pump the water out of the bilge. And then the two staircases leading up to the other deck. These were interesting projects because those staircases, if you'll note, actually have a curved side to them. In this view, we're trying to capture a little bit more of the open structure, showing one deck to the other, and you can see I put very little planking on the top deck just to expose the secondary deck below it. Good view looking from the stern side forward. This is an interesting view because in this view, if you look carefully, the dark object that you can see in front of the main mast there is a stove. This stove, I don't know if I have a picture of it on this film or not, but this stove actually had a rotisserie on it, and the rotisserie was activated by the wind going through the heat of the that the stove produced when it was in cooking process. The heat going out of the chimney would rotate this fan or slow these blades, and that was a chain link to a rotisserie. Kind of unique. And then you'll also see that I've got some simulated brick there that the stove is setting on. That was an interesting project in itself. Now in this view, we are looking at an upper view into the bowsprit, which in this particular case was cut off because no mast was shown, and then you'll see the two enclosed heads, one on each side, and then the open head area a little bit forward to that, and some of the woodwork that was done on the floor to fill in that area. Again, we are now looking at the bell, which was on its little bell tower. If you look carefully, you can see that little bell tower going across that railing there. We are looking from the front to the stern. Earlier ships, for some reason, always had a figurehead. Most of the time they were female, but as far as I can tell, this looks like some kind of a male warrior from some era of time. I don't think it was necessarily the revolutionary time that we see presented here. But anyway, they all had this figurehead on them. In this view here, we see a good view of the ship with the cannon doors open. But what I want to point out at this point is you see all those little dots in there. Those were pegs that were put in to hold the plank onto the inner part of the ship. Now in this particular case, they were called trunnels or tree nails. The word is spelled T-R-E-E, tree nails, but I think it's referred to more as trunnels. But the interesting part about these, imagine these boards that they had to put on were oak, and they were approximately 8 inches wide, 1.5 inches thick. They had a hand drill through that oak and into the base where the rib was, and then pound these trunnels or tree nails, whatever you want to call them, into that area. Now, in this particular ship, I drilled holes to simulate all of those and finished off those with a filler to simulate the pegs in the hole. And as to my best calculation, it's pretty close to 35,000 that I put in here. The detail we're looking at now is basically, you see the door with the hinges on to the left-hand side. That might have been a door that they take product into that level. Could have even been how they got their cannonballs in and stuff like that. And then you'll see the steps going up the side. I would imagine you had to be hanging on a rope to go up those. And then along the back, you'll see all the way along the ship those U-shaped pieces. Those are hinges on little doors that would open, and they were called sweep-out doors, where they could open those and sweep things out that were on that level of deck. A nice view here of the back area of the ship. You can see how I had to bend the wood and make it fit, which is what they had to do in those days. They had to steam all that oak. Sometimes that oak would have to steam for over a day just to bend it and fit it. And then we have a little bit of the ornate detail shown below the captain's area there toward the back, and then the rudder with the hinges on. The rudder actually works. It is a hinged rudder. Just another view showing the cutaway detail of one deck to the other deck, and of course the parquet floor where the captain kept his belongings. And I don't know if I see it on these pictures or not, but I know there were 2 cannon in there too. And then you see the windows in the back area also. This is a view that I'm trying to show. We go down the stair that you see off to your left hand side, and when you're in that lower deck, if you follow toward the top of the picture, you see a door. It looks like it had glass in it or some kind of a pane. And then as you go on a little bit farther back, you see another door that would have went into the cabins area. This was the kind of detail that these people were looking for. They wanted to see what the ship looked like. Here we see an area where they had the 2 lifeboats. One was a fairly large boat, as you can see, and then one was a little bit smaller. And those were on kind of a raised area going across the top of that deck, and that's where they carried those 2 boats. Just another view of the boats, taken more or less from the front or bow of the boat in their set location. So a nice stern view. You see all the windows going across the back, the name of the ship, Confederacy, and then all the fancy scroll work. They were really into all this scroll work. It didn't really help anything except maybe their morale. Well, this is an interesting picture because you can see how much detail was put into the cabin area of the captain, and all the earlier sailing ships just were that ornate in the back area. It was just a symbol. I don't know if it was a status symbol or it was just the way they built the ships, but that detail takes a lot of time to put on a model. But it's challenging but rewarding. Well, this will be the last picture detail I have of the Confederacy, and again we're looking at the little lifeboats. The reason I'm spending a little time on these were really built like real boats. They had 1/32 planking on the side and the ribbing in the inside, so each one of these was time consuming. It was like you were building two little extra boats, and hard to get enthused about too, but look good when they're done. So anyway, this pretty well winds up the Confederacy. Again, probably the most detailed to date ship I ever built, and it was a challenge, but I appreciate all the detail. This is a model I'm currently working on. The name of this model is the U.S. Brig Cyrene. This ship was launched in 1803, and its primary purpose was to go to Tripoli, which was a base that was having a lot of trouble, and the Marines were being sent there, so this ship was the ship that really was part of solving that pirate problem that they had in Tripoli. Later on it returned to the United States, and eventually it was actually captured in 1812 by a 74-gun British ship called HMS Medway. This ship will also have a lot of detail. It's only a two-master, but it still has the detail that a ship at that time would have had. I'm going to show in some of these pictures some of the detail that I put into the guns. I've put little rope coils in, trying to make it more authentic, and then we see part of the lifeboat on its raised elevation area back in the back part of the picture. In this area here we see more of the lifeboat, some of the guns along the side. The lifeboat put a lot of detail into that. It was a lot of work. If you look carefully where the oars are, you can see all the rib detail that was put in. This lifeboat was carved out of a solid piece of laminated wood. A big job. Giving you a little more detail, the guns that were on this ship were called cannonades. And the difference of these versus the other cannon was they could pivot, they could swing in an arc, they were attached to a pivot point in front, and they also had the ability, you see the slide area in there when the gun was fired, instead of rolling back on wheels, it would slide on that slide area and then be pulled ahead by the ropes. A little bit different than the regular cannon. Here I'm trying to capture some of the detail of the steering helm, kind of a unique system. The ropes went around to pulleys and then around the side and then back over to a tiller arm that was actually pulled back and forth by cranking that wheel. Also I have some pretty nice detail on the bell assembly, plus the cabinet that had the compass in it. What's a little unique on this ship, Cyrene, it's have a small nameplate in there, is it did have two rear-facing cannons, and these would have actually been permanently positioned in the captain's quarters. Most of them didn't have it that obvious that they were rear-facing. Here we see a little better view. These were two cannons, the others were cannonades, and these two were located on a carriage that had wheels, and the two of them are mounted in the back with the tiller arm going across there too. I have to probably recline on my comment on whether this was a captain's area. Now in looking at this, the captain may have been in the deck below that. Doesn't seem like he could have been in here. In this view we also see the cannonades with the ropes, but what I'm trying to show in this view, if you look to the top of the picture, is a railing, and on this railing there's a net set up on top there running the length of the railing. I understand that during the day they would take their bedrolls and pack them into this net, and sometimes in battle they kept them there to shield the stuff from flying in. Well, this will be my last picture of the ship at this stage. You notice from the earlier picture it does have the coppered bottom, and what I'm showing here is the figurehead, and this particular ship has a very obviously female figurehead, which I mentioned previously most of them did have. But the front area with the curved wood coming up to there is a very difficult part to build, and it's always the part I really don't look forward to, but it turned out pretty good. So probably got maybe another half a year and we'll have this thing all done. Thanks for watching the video.